Good afternoon, everybody. We got mic options. This mic is here to record for this live stream, but just let us know if you have a hard time hearing us. I wanted this to be as lo-fi and personal and intimate as possible. I had stopped advertising after a while because I didn't want too many people to show up. I wanted it to be like a real conversation, and so I'm really happy to see those of you that came on time that are obviously interested in this very important topic. So thank y'all for coming and spending y'all afternoon with us. I'm really excited about this conversation. Like this is, this is a selfish conversation for me. I have two sons. One is sitting in my chair, and there are dilemmas that I have all the time. Like, what does it mean to have him with me at seminars? And I remember when I was at his age, I went to lectures with my dad. He dragged me to all the stuff, and somehow I made it through without a phone in my hand. Like somehow I didn't get bored to death. My brain didn't fall out. For some reason, we made it through the world without technology. And so I always struggle with what to do in this moment. Do I make him just wait? Do I just, is it better to have him distracted and quiet so I could focus on the conversation? And what are the consequences of the convenience of having him playing on the phone? And what is that going to turn into? Like, I think we're in the middle of some experiments with socially, technologically, and really, some of these answers we're not going to know what the ramifications of the attempt, also raising boys, struggling with some of the stuff. There's always conversations that I want to have. We never get a chance to, so I'm appreciative of this panelist to take their time out to come share with me, with us, some of the things that they have learned along their way, some of the bumps that they've bumped into, to, again, answer some of the difficult questions that we don't never get a chance to, and have an honest conversation. I was thinking that it would be better if it wasn't live streamed, but we're just gonna see. And if there's a moment when y'all feel like we want to turn it off, let me know. If there's something that's personal, if you got like a wife at home you don't want to hear this, just let us know. Because there's the other dilemmas. Like, there's information that's going to be shared today that wider audiences need to have access to. Some people just literally can't be here. Some people aren't in Chicago, and so we're just trying to deal with that also. The beginning of the idea for this happened, this was really about a year ago, when I took my son out of a school that he was in called Beta Shabazz. It used to be New Concept Development Center. I went to it when I was a kid. My younger brother, Yende, went all the way up through 8th grade in it. So it was a family school. Like, we were very comfortable in it. And then after the first 2 years, after his kindergarten year, his mom was like, she was having concerns about the academics. The culture was good, the family feel was good, but she didn't know if they were preparing him to be able to be successful and whatever success looked like, at that time. So she fought, and I stopped arguing, and we just ended up taking him out of that school and took him to Walt Disney Magnet School off Irving Park. Charter school, sort of good reputation for the numbers. It's a very corporate school. On the outside, it looks like it's very diverse because you see like the parents dropping them off and they're from all over the world. But on the inside, everybody decides to just give all their culture away to let the school turn our children into sort of these academic products. It's, pros and cons, advantages, disadvantages. The very specific thing that I had a concern about was the question about what I worry about when I meet sort of older boys, and I meet, older boys with parents that were raised in sort of African-centered cultural houses, but then somehow their boys grow up and are dating white girls. And the parents are like, I don't know how this happened. I don't know where this came from. I spent all my life encouraging him to love black people, black women, and surround them and stuff, but somehow he grew up and is married to a white woman, and I don't understand it. And it's that decision for me. When I took the boy out of the Beta Shabazz, put him in Walt Disney Magnet School, it occurred to me that this is that moment when parents make those decisions, and that there's repercussions to it in other ways when we're trying to figure out how to give them wellness in some ways, and that there's always this constant checks and balances, just pros and cons. And so there's lots of nuances to all of it that I just want to be able to get a chance to talk about. that, me trying to figure it out on my own, I feel like we're just going to miss some insights from people that have done that. So I wanted to convene this conversation and invite everyone here to participate as much as we can. This is not a panel of experts. I'm asking people not to even share what they think about these topics, but like just what your experience has been in your house having these kind of conversations with your boys. What worked, what didn't work, what you have done different, if you could do it over again, like those kind of like personal experience questions. I imagine there aren't any perfect parents here. I imagine none of us have created perfect children. I feel like we all just trying to do our best to do our best. And what I don't want, it's kind of the expectation, the ground rules, and intentions for the conversation. I don't want it to be like a debate so much. Like if people say something that is different than you would do in your house, like let just say it. Like I see it different. I had a different approach. Don't try to convince nobody else in the room to do it your way. Like I don't want us to get into a back and forth about what is the right way to do it. I just want us to be able to share as many perspectives about different ways to look at how to have these conversations and prepare our boys to be the best young men they can be. And with the assumption that there's no right way to do it necessarily. Also, I want to also say up front that I'm very clear that there is only so much control that we have as parents over the outcomes that our children become. That there's a sweet, I learned there's a Sweet Honey in the Rock song, but it was, I think, a Khalil Gibran, somebody, poet, had a poem, said, they're not your children, they're just the sons and daughters of life, they come through you, they're not for you. So I just want to say that. I don't want to have to keep saying it over and over again, that I'm going to love my boy whoever he bring home. I'm going to love him whatever he decides to do. Like, I'm not going to accept whatever decisions he makes. And I want to think about what control do I have? What direction can I give? What framework, what structure? What are some of the grounding things that I can provide for him in the house, given that he will be influenced by all kinds of other things, and that as he makes those decisions, I got to accept and love him for that. So there's certain things that I just got to, certain things we can't do. There's certain control we can have, and we got to accept that as parents, and I get that. So I just want to, say that also. To this particular conversation, I want to spend the time thinking about what power, control, influence do we have to impact the trajectory of our young people, and how do we best maximize the relationships that we have with them, the structure we can create in the household, and dealing with some of the topics that, we don't get to talk about that much. So I'm gonna come back to the white girl thing later, but I want to start with something that I actually didn't put on the panel. I have a question. This is going to be a warm-up question. It might be an easy question, but maybe not. I want to talk first, introduce the panel. This is Brother Kwaku, master educator, restorative practices, dean students on West Side. He has some boys that are brilliant musicians. I've gone to his son's shows independent, like just, right, he's not even there. Like I just, have conversations, and that's the thing that happens. Like I have conversations with your sons that tell me more about you than you could ever tell me, right? Just you ain't even in the room, but I just know what you've given them because of who they become out in the world. Dr. Sharon Bethia, psychologist, world traveler, author, another brilliant mind, thinker, and worker. She has how old is your boy now?
Ooh, 34.
34-year-old boy. Traveled around the world playing basketball in Europe and that kind of stuff. Diala Kenyatta, one of my favorite political analysts, activists, minds, thinkers. I just think that everybody should always read what he says. And I think that a lot of it is really, really like, it be wild, like it should be wild sometimes. But like, you just gotta consider it. Like he says shit, you just gotta like, I ain't never thought about it that way, but you just gotta, whether you agree, disagree, you just gotta like, it has to be a part of the conversation if we're gonna move forward. He's just one of those minds for me. Candace Washington, mother of 2 boys. She's the founder of a nonprofit called Brown Books and Paintbrushes. She's an early childhood educator, so she spends her days with 4 to 5, 6-year-olds, and has a nonprofit that focuses on literacy for Black children. And I wanted her to think about the social and emotional development stuff that happens in the school for young boys, but also what happens in her house, because I also spend time with her boys. I'm impressed with, what she's done with her children. So I just want to talk about how y'all did this. So my first topic, and it's not a question, it's a topic. I want to talk a little bit about athletics. We just dropped Candace's son off to college, Missouri, liberal arts school, about 6 hours away, and I was I was a little bit, not a little bit, I was embarrassed being on the campus and knowing that all of the black boys there were there for basketball. Like, it's just embarrassing knowing that everybody knows that's what these boys are here for. And I know that I'm not really into sports, but I know that there's a lot of really good things that young boys get from the coach relationships, from the team life, from the athletics. There's nutrition in there. And so I struggle sometimes, even with the high school, and I'm in the juvenile detention center. Like 90% of the boys, maybe 95% of the boys, want to be athletes or entertainers. They NFL, NBA, athletes are entertainers. I like it. And so I struggle with, like, I don't want to go in there and, like, step on their dreams. You know, we can have conversations about the odds and the gamble of it, but, like, I don't know. I wonder how y'all have dealt with dealing with, like, the best imagination of most of our boys is wrapped up into a very rigid, narrow version of what their future's life can look like. That's connected to success and money and travel. They get so much from rapping and playing basketball that it's hard to, like, wrestle that from them. But I wonder, like, what are the ways that y'all have taken advantage of sports in the house, or use arts as a way to give different skill sets, or discourage them if that happens? I don't know what to do with sports in general. Sports and rapping are the two things that I feel like all the boys want, and I don't know if that's good for us, and I don't know what to do as a mentor, as an educator, or as a parent about that just sort of state of reality for our young boys right now. Go for it. Oh. So wait. Let's do this. So I want to have, for every topic question, I want to get the panelists to go first, and then I want to have maybe 3 or 4 comments before we move on to the next thing from the audience. So there's a little bit of order, and just to, they committed the time to being here. You could leave when you feel like it. So I just want to give them that, the attention.
I'll start off. I call it ball chasing, because this is not a new phenomenon. If you look at African people's history under white domination, the Africans who had particular physical prowess were always rewarded, even in the time of chattel slavery. I think there was a movie, Django, showed the African fighters, and they would be brought in, and also due to the delusions that white people had about eugenics and breeding Africans, black men who displayed particular physical traits were also allowed to avoid hard labor, debilitating labor, and they were also given an abundance of women to have intercourse with, to breed more strong bodies for the owners, and those strong bodies would bring profits to the owners because they would trade them, and when they would trade them, they would bring them out to display their physical powers, to do things. It all sounds very familiar. So Africans' adherence and love of sports and following sports is a direct byproduct of us being enslaved and us continuing to be property. And the rewards have changed somewhat, as opposed to a comfortable cot within the master's house, as opposed to getting, an extra chitlin rations, as opposed to, being limited to just black women, an abundance of black women for breeding stock. They get women of white women and women exotic, what they would call exotic women. But the sports is a byproduct of the power dynamic. It is black men, since our inception into this country and since we fell into white colonization, have been under the strong body, weak mind paradigm. And so you'll find that black men that engage in intellectual, scholarly, philosophical pursuits, they will always be challenged to say, well, what are you doing? What are you doing with you? What are you doing all this talking? What are you doing? I've even been to a lecture with Dr. Ben and Dr. John Henry Clark, where they will be articulating some of the most valuable scholarship in the area of history and philosophy. And people in the audience would stand up and say, yeah, but what are you doing? You talk about the pyramids, can you make a pyramid? As opposed to white men, I've been to see everyone from Christian Parenti, Noam Chomsky. They will pontificate, study, and engage in pursuits of the minds, pursuits of philosophy, astrology, whatever suits their fancy. And there's never this notion that that white men don't have value beyond their physical sense. So when you watch sports, when you consume sports, the emotion, you also know that men that tend to be emotionally constipated, when they're watching sports, you will see them emote. You will see them embrace each other when their team scores. You'll see them express sorrow without any type of reserve. If their team is losing, if their athlete is injured or traded, black men are able to express themselves as and use sports as a conduit to be human, to be valued. So sports is slavery. Personally, I hate pro sports. I hate pro athletes. They get a fleet of cars, and it's a certain trade-off. But the fundamental value system, ideology, and the fundamental power relationships have not shifted. And we, as the community, fully participate in that.
How does that play out in your house? Do your boys try to watch the game and you said no?
No. There's just something about children. There's certain youth instincts. There's certain things our children know that we don't have to teach them. And a list here. You don't have to teach children about fairness. As soon as they learn it, that's not fair. That's instinctual. Another thing that's instinctual that children identify, and a lot of times they do it to get over on you, so it's annoying, but they understand inconsistencies and contradictions. That's something certain. You have to teach them to wipe their behind. You have to teach them to clean their room. There's certain fundamental things that we as the human primates are instinctual. So I don't have to tell my sons, don't play sports, don't watch sports. Now, my house is a very pro sports. My son has a shattered, broken knee right now because he was out skateboarding. Very physically active. Martial arts, basketball, soccer. But we have never pursued, like they don't see pro sports in my house. They can't name any athlete. But they know sports. They appreciate athleticism. They appreciate camaraderie. They appreciate physicality. But we don't use the corporate machine of the pro sports industry. We don't watch NBA, NFL. You know, last time I was at a game cheering, it was for local black children playing bitty basketball in my community. So I love sports. I hate and reject the sports industry. So yeah, when you're enjoying sports, hey, it's just something I do. Because that was pastime. When you weren't picking cotton, when our ancestors weren't picking cotton, they were allowed to play games. Running, jumping, hopping, skipping, fighting, spitting. We were allowed to play games in our leisure time. Again, the fundamental power dynamic has not changed. And I advocate that the black community, first of all, I call it ball chasing to demean it. I call them professional ball chasers, deliberately, to demean the status. First thing I did was work deliberately and consciously to diminish the value, the influence, and the stature of pro athletes. Now my sons, they know who Muhammad Ali is. And I think my oldest son knows who Colin Kaepernick is. So if they're going to value an athlete, it won't be because of the billions of dollars of revenue they generate for this industry. And I think we should be hostile to it. Fundamentally, we should be fundamentally hostile to the sports industry. And you don't have to tell your children, don't watch it. They realize contradictions and inconsistencies. You can't have it, oh, shut up, the game's on. Oh, it's the Pro Bowl, they see you come together. The only time they see you being emotional, being intimate, being jovial, is when somebody's chasing the ball on the screen. So even if you tell them, hey, books before the ball, they realize inconsistencies. So all you got to do is just adopt the position and live out the position. And regardless of what you don't or do say to your child, they will pick that up. It's not anything you really have to put effort to.
Gotcha. That was the warm-up question.
I want to respond a little bit. Raising a boy who was an elite athlete. And for me, knowing all that and the fear that, he was one of those kids. Basketball in his hand at the very youngest age, he was extremely talented. So how do I now balance what I know, some of the information you're saying, with a young boy who is that talented from the beginning, and this notion of letting them be. And so there's kind of different ways I combat it. He started out in an African Center school, so he had that kind of connection. The more he played sports, the more I demanded he do other things. So played the sax, he boot danced, he was a scholar. In high school, they had that, to play sports, you had to have a 2.5, but in my house, you had to be on the honor roll. And I'm like, and if you slipped anyway, I'm like, you must be playing too much basketball. But what I couldn't do is squash and ignore the talent. And so I took this whole more mind, body, spirit kind of approach, that as talented you are as your body, you're even more talented in your mind. And so it became where his coaches, his peers, his father, who was also an athlete, cultivated that part of him. So for me, I had to make sure I balanced the other stuff. I cultivated the spiritual stuff. I cultivated the intellectual stuff. I was that basketball mom. And so you hear the stories like, I was that basketball mom. I'm like, okay, you guys are an elite basketball team. It's high school. So I'm about to be the tutor mom, right? Whereas his team had the highest GPA in the entire conference. They won the state championship. But it was always that constant struggle, because a lot of what you say is very true. And even when I look at even understanding how this connection to enslavement happened, also understanding, and when I kind of start my classes out with this magic of being African, that in every book it says where it began is going to end. And we know that everybody knows, other cultures are not happy about it, that when we talk about however you believe it, but in books, God creating human beings looking like God, that look like us. So having understanding that you're a God and God-like, and that's cute and all, but you got to be cute in every aspect of all of it. So I work on his spirit. I work on his intellectual. I remember at one point he had to have a 3.25 to be on the honor roll, and he literally had a 3.2. Coming to me talking about, well, I'm almost there. Nah. And championships were coming up. I will pull you. And making him stop for a second, coaches all over me, until you get back to the honor roll. And he did. I even remember, because people used to say, well, do you want to use academics and spirits? Because it wasn't a punishment, but I recall him coming to me and me all over him about his books. He said, Mom, now I got it. I don't need you doing all that. I want to be on the honor roll. I want to be brilliant. I am brilliant. And even him applying to colleges. For me, yay, because he got a full ride. But him getting into the top schools that he got into, he didn't use his basketball. So that balance was kind of interesting. And then some of the benefits, he did travel the world. He did learn different languages. He did learn how to negotiate things, to where he actually made his own decision at a basketball game. Time for me to quit. Called me right before the game, trying to get into schools ranked 7th in the world. What you think? You know, moms do what moms do. Baby, you can do anything in the world, but I'm thinking, I hope you got another plan. And so we always talked about other plans. Okay, that's fine. What's your plan? What's your plan? What's your plan? Or how are you going to create that? And him literally stopping in the middle of playing basketball at his height and saying, I'm going to go to this school and get my MBA. And that was on his own without me consoling him and him doing this. So it's always been a constant battle. So I won't say take it away from him just because that's who they are. That's who he was. But how do we balance? So have that information you're talking about, but still letting kids be who they are and making the connections for them as parents. You're talented here, which means you're talented there, because there is no disconnection between mind, body, and spirit, right? Yes, Africans are the best athletes because Africans have always been the best at it. Even before enslavement, we go back and look in Kush and look at Kemet. We have always done this. Every sport there is a carbon copy of something they stole off the continent that people just did on a daily basis. But it never diminished your spirit, because spirit always came first. Diminish your family, because family was right there. Diminish yourself, because self is so important. Understanding nutrition, understanding all of that, how it's combined. So I struggled all my life, and he's doing great now, but even the same thing, because he was such a high-profile athlete for so long, I remember sitting there thinking, oh, this all he knows what's going to happen. And just being anguished about it, stressed about it. And then to see all my teachings coming to fruition, his grandparents teaching, his father's even teaching, because his father, one time he got in trouble for cheating. So we'll get more prayer. Got in trouble for cheating. And he was such a good student that the teacher called me first, and he said, I told him to tell you. Of course, he did not. And so I ended up at school, and I'm like, well, you're benched, right? She let him take the test over, and I remember the parents coming at me because they were undefeated. You're not going to let John play? And it became interesting because the white parents were begging me to play. All the black parents were like, oh, bro must have did something. They knew why he was sitting on the bench. And I remember, like, I'm going to call my dad. We're undefeated. And he said, well, you better go with your moms. Because not only would I have benched you, you'd be off the basketball team. So you can make a choice. My way of being, you're off the basketball team, but you can just be benched for a couple of games. And so it was a hard balance, understanding. So as a basketball mom, I try to talk about what that meant for my son, for me, for our family, for his his grandmother traveling over the world watching him, me traveling around the world watching him, because they always got those things you talked about. So I'm like, cool, you got a place, you got a car, I'm on my way, right? And being there, even in that, when he was playing in Europe, reminding him, tapping him on the head, who you are, where you come from, what you need to give back, how you have to give back. Even as a grown person, he's like, oh my God, he's never going to hinder it, but he heard it yesterday. So, because in that, he now works in corporate America, but basketball is his first love, so he started his own basketball business, right? Helping kids develop. And what I liked, there were some testimonies about parents talking about Coach Sharper. And this is his second gig, that not only did he teach them skills, but he taught them how to be a man. So I'm like, okay, he's using it in his, because he talks about nutrition, he talks about school, he will bench you if you don't. So now he's kind of passing that forward, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but just to put it out there.
Y'all got something y'all want to add or open it up? What y'all want to do? Candace, quickly. Or not, I mean.
No, it's fine. I got a 6'5" son. He's the son I was talking about that we just dropped off. In Missouri, he's been tall all his life. Jason could care less about basketball. He did, like she was saying, he went to, they won the state championship, Providence St. Mel, in his class. I think my success story with Jason, and I call it a success story because he didn't give into the athleticism. He didn't give into, and he got the scholarship to play basketball in Missouri. It was half scholarship and it was half athletic and it was half academic, is because I had this big love for literacy, and Jason has always had a book in his hand. Always. He learned the power of, not giving into that part of the athleticism that this brother was just talking about and that sort of thing. So that's what but when I think about it and I hear y'all saying how y'all raising your children and different things like that, and I'm an early educator, so I'm an early educator, and so I get y'all babies when they 0 to about 5 years old. And I was just talking to my vice president of programming for the school that I work for, and one thing that she said, and she had to stop herself, she said, "Ooh, that was good." She said, if you ready at 5, you ready for life. From 0 to 5. Early educators have that part, that social emotional development. They at the height of their social emotional development at 0 to 5. So we have that power, and it's just work. I was just telling O'Barry, it's so much work to raise a child. It's so much work. It's so much work. And so when people ask me, they say, when they say, "Ooh, I'm gonna have a baby and I'm gonna have them back to back," I say, "Let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Walk me through your thought process. Why you want to have a baby?" I need to know, because after a while, it's not just dressed up, And I hear the potty training, and it's the potty training, but it's that part. What about sex, and are you gay, and porn, and just dealing with this piece, athleticism and rap, it's just so much work. Just like any relationship, it's so much work to raise a child. And then you have a partner, right? I never liked to rap, right? Hated rap. I could care less about basketball, but they dad loved it. So that's how they got exposed to it. And O'Brien has introduced me to rap artists that I love now, you know, but I never knew that, you know, that ever existed. I always heard, you know, bitch this, nigga this, like, why I want to listen to that all the time, you know. So, you know, within all of these conversations that we have today, I just want y'all to keep that in mind. It's just a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And this piece, that just that small piece, that this first question, that's just this tiny little piece. Yeah.
And our response or way of trying to dealing with that very tiny piece as well came with my oldest, who started off in the bitty basketball leagues, right, and was actually a pretty good basketball player. But what we had a difficult time kind of trying to deal with was allowing these coaches and everybody else from this perspective, right, to holler and cuss and beat down your child for the sake of trying to make this team better or to score points or to win. And we're in the background like, wait a minute, is this team, is this game for the children, or is it for the coaches and the adults and the parents that are around? The other, and then having to maybe rebuild or build up your child after those experiences was very tough. And so it put us in a position to, you know, continue struggling with it, continue questioning it, and then also having these conversations with my oldest, with Micah, about, I mean, how you feeling about this? And then it kind of shifted from there, having to deal with all of that nonsense, into the tearing down of your body, the athlete's body, at the expense of someone else's entertainment. And so that's how we ended up kind of really dealing with the sports piece. He, at some point, moved away from basketball, probably for all that, and we had gone through a number of different coaches, right? So it wasn't just this one who we just got in our feelings about, right? This is pretty much throughout the culture of bitty sport coaches. Everybody wants to holler and cuss and work you until you pretty much fall out. I'm like, dude, these are children. They're 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they shouldn't be hustling like this for a basketball game or whatever the sport happens to be. Kind of shifted over into swimming. And you might think that swimming might bring a different experience, right? Well, in swimming, coaches can be just the same, right? They want to holler and cuss. In swimming as well. And while he's a good swimmer, being in that swimming atmosphere of trying to be coached to be on a particular team and achieve these results was, again, pretty damaging, you know, in our early days of you know, raising, you know, my oldest. And so it moved us from that space of, you know, again, being able to, one, experience it, but then also looking at it from a perspective of, no, I'm not comfortable with, you know, and that's just this one perspective of it, right? Not comfortable with my child having to be, you know, beat down and broken down, and then I have to come back in and try and build them back up to, you know, it was too much work. And so it took him from that space of wanting to really participate on his own. We didn't pull him out, except for this one coach that had really cussed, you know, just a bit too much. And it's not about the profanity, right? Everybody cusses to an extent, but the way it was coming out, the way it was coming across, is what, and the look that you can see on the child's face, that you can tell how broken that they can be in those moments of just missing the crossover, or, you know, double dribbling, or traveling, any of these calls that can, you know, you can end up, and then you end up being pulled and cussed out, and that's too much, in my perspective, or in our perspective, for your child to have to deal with. And so that's how we ended up having to, or diving into the pool the wrong way, you know, not doing your stroke the way it should happen. And so our thing was really, what can I do in terms of teaching basketball or teaching swimming? in these two instances that would be different from the coaches. And so we, in one essence, we took them out of the picture, and then I went to my research and was like, what does it take to be a swimming coach, whatever. And now I have my son in the pool still learning how to, continue on. So it wasn't about taking them all completely away from because of these experiences, but how do we do it differently? That's been our whole approach to a lot of what will probably come out of the panel today is how can we do it differently to where it doesn't follow suit with, maintaining the status quo of things that just don't have to be that way. And so that was our piece. My youngest, he is, he's kind of in a different space. He's not really feeling it either. And it could be from the family's influence of how we approach or how we approach. And there's a 10-year gap, right? Don't drink the water in Punta Cana, but there's a 10-year space between my oldest and my youngest. So we're still in that space of trying to figure out how my youngest is going to engage. And we just haven't really come to that idea yet. I mean, they participate in some other personal stuff, like the martial arts and things like that, but the active sports, what we're most used to, what, kind of the conversation started off with, they aren't really there for those main reasons that I've kind of laid out.
Okay. You want to jump in? You were just standing up a second ago.
I'm not a mother, but I'm a grandmother. This is my grandson.
Yeah.
And so,
How'd you accomplish that?
huh?
You said you're not a mother, but a grandmother?
I mean, I'm not his mother.
Genetic engineering?
You're good listener. I'm not his mother. I'm his grandmother. This is my grandchild. But it's interesting that you started off this conversation because just the other day, well, we've had people like coaches like in Walmart and River Playground, come up to us and ask him if he wants to play football. You can see he's 8, but he's a big kid.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so just the other day, I took him to the park, and this guy was trying to encourage us to get him to play football. And so then when I asked, I said, how often do you play? And he said 5 days a week. And I was thinking, he said that we play on Saturday. And so I'm thinking like academics in my head. I'm saying, so if these kids are playing football, practicing at 6 o'clock in the evening after being in school, I'm thinking in my head, like where's the studying coming in? And so, Brayden, when we got in the car, he said to me, because I've been kind of like trying to push him into sports, and so now I'm like really feeling guilty now, but I've been trying to push him into sports for a number of reasons, for socialization, for physical fitness, all of that. And he said to me, he said, Grammy, he said, I'm not into sports. He said, I'd rather play. He said, I'd rather build robots. And so that hit me. I was like, wow. I was like, okay. Now I've been trying to push him into basketball, soccer, and he's just not like having it. But on the other end, he'd rather do other things. And so I think for me as a grandmother and his legal guardian, and me seeing all those other boys out there, I'm thinking to myself, like, I mean, there were like tons of boys out there, starting with this routine. I started thinking like, okay, so where are these kids academically? I'm sorry. I mean, because I know some kids can excel academically and they can do the sports. But I think that when we have our kids, so I had to absorb what he said to me and accept what he said to me. He said, just simply, I'm not into sports. And so I think I have to take that, even though I want him to be into some type of physical sport, I need to honor him and what he wants. And so I think that's what I need to do. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah, so I just want to say that.
Real quick follow-up question. How much of your desire to push him into sports had to do with having him be around older men?
A lot.
Okay.
That's a good question. Because I needed the mentorship. And where I live, there are mentoring programs, but they aren't for his age.
Okay.
And so, and that's, like I said, that's an excellent question, because that's what I'm seeking. I need for him to have that male involvement.
Right.
And we know why,
Right.
without saying it, you probably know why.
Right.
And so, yeah, so that's for me, that's a big part of it, but also for socialization, because he's homeless. So.
So I think that's just the question back for us, all of us. Like, how do we create places for 8-year-old boys to go, be socialized, be loved, mentored, get attention, be encouraged, that doesn't involve sport? Like, there's got to be other places they can go, and we got to create that. No other way it's gonna happen.
One of our approaches was tapping into our network, particularly when it comes to the socialization piece, and being, frightened of if my kid doesn't play sports and he won't be socialized. And I'm like, BS. Because, and I definitely want to be careful in understanding that, we may have a network that many other people do not, but just from the fact of being able to tap into that it's our siblings and their children, or our friends and their children, or some way or another, how can I create what is supposed to be missing, or what may be missing from these spaces that may not be as beneficial to our structure, our unit. And so that's what we ended up doing in terms of the socialization piece, was tapping into everybody else that we could, creating these smaller networks of, my son being able to venture out and have experiences with these others. So now the socialization is continuing, and it's flourishing in ways that we wouldn't have thought of. It wasn't just limited to bouncing or running a ball or chasing a ball, as Brother Diallo has clearly laid out, and I do in a way agree with that. I mean, that's what it turns out to for an extent. But how can we create that space? And so that's what we did. We tapped into everybody that we knew that had boys. And for those that had girls, whatever, let's bring them all together, because we got to learn how to socialize across the genders as well. And I'm certain we're going to get to that a little bit later, but that was necessary. And so that was our approach. We tapped in, and then we poured and made those phone calls. And is it okay if we create play? Now we're not as we're pretty consistent with our parents in terms of these play dates and sleepovers and things like that, because things have changed. Times have changed. And so if we were connecting with others, then it was on our terms. We weren't sending. Now that's selfish, but hey, it's my child. And I was creating this space, and okay, so yes, send your children over here. We'll create the space, and then we went from there. So that's one way to kind of look at it.
And just adding is folks making a decision to step up. Brothers making a decision to step up, sisters making a decision to step up, and then folks that do, because I was kind of like you, everybody came to my house, I was just like, felt better, and making that decision to say, these are all our children, and we have to do, and even if I saw you somewhere, I go somewhere to a meeting, I was kind of like Obari, my son was everywhere. It's like, no, you coming with me. If you ain't coming with me, you going with your daddy, right? Being in those spaces, and then hearing somebody say that they were a math teacher, or hearing somebody's like, what's up, bro? What you doing on Saturday, right? So if folks didn't perceive, and folks always stepped up. It's like, oh, can you take all the, or if I had the team calling somebody I know, can you come and pick them all up, take them in and do, because I do think there's male bonding stuff and female bonding stuff. And so we've got to make decisions to take care of our own kids, because it's on us. And everybody can be a mentor in every aspect. You know, sometimes people see me and they're surprised at my circle of people I know, or somebody walks up and I'll be like, what's up, Kill? Right? What's up? How you do? How do you know that person? Because we know there's genius on every corner. For black men, it's like how we define what success is. I think you brought that up. We have to kind of redefine that. This part of it you may not be doing, but there's some things you can learn from this brother, right? These things I might participate in, but I heard him talk about something the other day, so I literally went to the corner and hang out, because I'm in my neighborhood, I know these folks. I'm like, dude, let's go sit in the corner and have a conversation, and the things that you learn on the corner, because you want to not only have book smarts, you want to have street smarts, right? And what that means is we're going to come to the corner, and this is what you're not going to be doing today, because I'm bringing 5 of my son and his friends with us, and so can we have some other conversations, right? And how do you have that in the community? Because we do have the capacity to do that. That we can find mentorship in all kinds of places and spaces, as well as on the basketball court. Some of our biggest fans and mentors have been that, and pulling them out of it's not just about basketball, which I appreciate that my son is now doing, that he covers mind, body, spirit, because that's how he grew up. So if you ain't eating right, doing right, like I made Gatorade, they had that, I said, and I make my own stuff, right? Did the research. This is what his bottle looks like. Then other parents be like, ooh, can you make me some of that? Can you make me some of that? So now he's mentoring and doing basketball, and that is their Gatorade. It's like, oh, my mom has this recipe, which is simple. Mineral water, little vitamin E, right? Shake it up, drink it, and bring all that back to your body. So how do we do that in those spaces and step up and identify ourselves? And if not, we identify them and say, you need to step up, bro. Sister, you need to step up.
It's something I've always observed, and I'm kind of hearing it play out. Where I kind of summed it up is we as African people are forced into this dichotomy that in our attempts to save our children's bodies, we sacrifice their minds. Or in our attempt to save their minds or develop their minds, we sacrifice their bodies. As if there's some divergence between physical and intellectual development. And we say, well, I want him to be socialized and this and that. And this is really about trying to have this mockery of a community where we want all the benefits of community, but we don't want to give any of the inputs. And then we want to extract as much from community with giving it limited input, which is basically a market value in the marketplace that we've all forced to live within this capitalist economy. The whole strive is what you want to extract maximum profit or returns with minimum inputs, and then you win and you succeed in the society. Our problem is the deterioration of our community and the lack of capacity to construct and sustain community because of the many vulnerabilities that we have. And the athletics is just one, is you can take the model of athleticism and you can superimpose it on academics. It's the same thing for academics, for our children, where the brightest in our communities are extracted by multinational corporations or the state to construct and support the infrastructure that leads to our oppression. So we're having discussions about how do we thrive in a system based on our degradation, and how do we set up our particular children to thrive in a system that is based on our collective degradation. So what benefits can I give my individual son? How do I benefit their physical needs or develop their physical priorities versus their academic so that they can avoid the ravages of the system? But the trick is, in order to avoid the ravages of the system, in order to get the compensation you need, you have to perpetuate the ravages of the system. I got to cut your water off so my water can stay on. I'll cut your lights off so my lights can stay on. I undercompensate you for your labor so I can receive adequate or sufficient compensation for my labor. This is not an individual problem, and there is no individual solution. Black people are not to blame for this, but we're responsible for addressing and correcting this. And our children, as they come up in this system, as we try to help them, what I call navigate the system, and even some of us want to fully integrate into the system, our children are realizing that contradiction. They sense it to their heart that we're not being consistent, that we're not doing what we should do. We tell them that you can be anything you want to be, when it's not true. It's not true. So I don't really think that sports are the problem. But what we have to do with sports and academics, but sports as the focus, we have to decommercialize, decommodify, make it communal, and make it internal for our development. Because if we don't do this, we will continue to produce human resources for the extraction and profit of external institutions. And they will send us back what comes after from whatever resources extracted is the process of extraction leaves waste, sludge. And so, not to take away from what's being said here, but this is really about our collective development, not really our individual children, because the children can't escape. I don't care if you're Kaepernick or you list whatever. It's submission or destruction, submission or suppression. And so the only way for us to get beyond that, regardless of how well our individual children do or not, is to come up with a collective agenda. And we have to have a fundamental cultural revolution. We have to reevaluate things. We have to totally transform how we value things or how we even define or understand things. Or, you know, we will continue to perpetuate this. Well, we don't have much longer. I mean, Greenland is melting. So, you know, we could might wrap this all up.
But I just,
As long as we here.
And I can't just add to that, that when we talk about our cultural context, it's an African diaspora. It's not just, it's like we teach our kids that this is about what human beingness is about. There's an African diaspora that your dreams can be fulfilled. Whatever they are, that I take students on study abroad. I've already talked about how much I travel. My son travels a lot. I've seen them go to the continent and their lives totally transformed. I'm not saying that Africa's a panacea, so I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is this, that our experience is bigger than what's in America. That there's greatness, and not in tourist places. We're like, oh, I went to Ghana and they was bleaching. But did you go to the mountains? Did you go to the valleys? Did you go to the river? Did you go hang out with their communities of people that are 100 years old? They're still going to market, working every day. Have a talk with those elders and understand what it is and what it does to our children. And then people say, well, you know, I can't afford that. I hear you. This is what I do in my class. My students say, well, I can't afford this. And I'm like, I want everybody to look at their shoes. There'd be tons of Nikes in the room. Look at their clothes. And I probably can get y'all just what y'all got on. I probably can get all of y'all to Africa if that's what you wanted to do. Right? And so how do we change our mindset, understanding that we're an African diaspora and that we're connected to that diaspora?
Ooh, yes, sir. You make those shirts? You make those shirts?
No, somebody bought it from the
What does it say? Black Sun. Dope. Hey.
I think I have a lot of responsibilities as a father. I think one of the biggest ones is teaching my sons how to maneuver, just like how you said, navigate, maneuver through this world, and we're still not. And just, I actually had a conversation with my wife about this yesterday about sports. And I kind of want them to have to mirror the experience that I had growing up. I was in first through 8th grade. It was all black. Played with all black kids, kids that looked like me. And not necessarily to say I want them to have the experience that I had in high school and college, but I went from all black to all white. But the one thing I can say is when I started high school, I was equipped from a culture that was rooted, culturally sound, and I was able to maneuver through sports in high school and college. And the one thing I can say, the positive thing about playing sports in high school, the kids that I played with, they were already shaped by their parents, the experiences they had, and perceptions that their parents gave them. But playing with me, and playing a sport where we all had a common goal of winning, in my opinion, I was able to break down those walls that they had about black people. And when I had my two boys, my objective was to equip them and make sure they be able to maneuver through the world and be able to succeed. And kind of going back to what you were saying about Colin Kaepernick, I want them to be able to know that also Colin Kaepernick did throw touchdowns, but he's also an activist. And just like Michael Jordan did dunk basketball, he's also an owner of the team. So I want them to know, not only just from the sport aspect, you're known to be an athlete, but you will also be an owner.
Thank you.
I don't think you heard.
I'm sorry?
I don't think you heard what you said. We can take one more sports comment, and then I'm gonna switch topics. Or whatever. Talk about it.
So, this comment maybe will, I don't want to belabor the point any longer, but maybe put it into like a broader scope of the pop culture dynamic we're dealing with now. So, recently, Jay-Z is doing a lot of talks with the NFL, and I would just be interested on if the panelists know anything about that, maybe speaking on that in the broader scope of our culture, how basically the move he's trying to make towards the NFL, how that looks for all of us, how that looks for him as an individual, and how that kind of plays into the ethos, kind of what Viola was touching on as far as our expectations of black people, African people here in the United States, and how it relates to sports.
Well, with the Jay-Z, in case you don't know, Jay-Z just inked a deal with the NFL for Rockefeller Records, and he'll basically book entertainers for the halftime shows and other major promotional events. He will be basically the talent scout and the talent manager. And there's also a social justice component, which he will provide a conduit for the athletes to have an opportunity to express their views off the field and outside of the arena of sports, so that there's no more overlap or disruption of the games and the revenues versus the political or the social justice aspects of it. For a long time, with the if you follow the news of it, and there's a great website called Edge of Sports. If you are a sports fan and you're addicted and you can't give it up, there's a website called Edge of Sports that talks about the intersection of politics, history, and sports. So at least when you consume this toxic product, you can have some type of greater insight. But Jay-Z, the NFL had a series of problems. Their athletes were caught on tape abusing women, and they found out that there's a history of domestic abuse from athletes, and that the NFL covers up because their commodities, their property, their human resources generate too much money to be bothered with abused women and children. Number two, directly related to that chronic encephalitis from chronic trauma encephalitis, which was literally driving these powerful men crazy and disrupting their brain function. And then they found out that many of the athletes, their health care runs out after they break their bodies. So the medical care, psychology, the families, and the larger societal damages that they cause. And then we find that the NFL was directly aligned with Donald Trump and the Trump administration, far-right politics, and basically global white domination and white aggression. So they had a lot of bad press over the last 5 or 6 years, and their revenue started to drop. So the NFL deliberately searched for a patsy, an Uncle Tom, a black face, an Obama. I mean, actually, we can start using that term now. It's been long enough. So they tried to find their own Obama, to rebrand. Because all the dirt, if we go back to Bush, Obama was put there to rebrand. It's basically the Obama hustle. To rebrand, they approached other artists to do this deal, like Jermaine Dupri of So Def. And we found out that Jay-Z directly called Jermaine Dupri and said, don't do that deal. And then he turned around a few months later and inked the same deal. And we found from industry insiders. But remember Beyonce, when the woman was beaten to a pulp by the athlete and the NFL tried to cover it up, one of their ball chasers beat this woman to a pulp, and then they had Beyonce come on stage and do the halftime show, and we forgot, thus absolve them of all the misogyny, sexism, and abuse and cover up of rape and domestic violence, and we let Beyonce get away with it. So in gender fairness, I guess we're going to allow Jay-Z to get away with personal enrichment and dilution of issues and distraction for profit. But this is absolutely nothing new. And what bothers me most about this whole Jay-Z NFL thing is how simplistic it is. This is PR 101. This is rebranding and propaganda 101. We, as a collective, are so simple. They have such little regard for us. They don't even come up with sophisticated tactics. They were like, let's find a popular Negro and put him up front. And then we can sit back with Trump and continue to collect our money. And I come up and down the lakeshore and I see the NBA games and I see all them black men in bear jerseys or whatever. I see y'all still go to the Bulls game. So it's going to work, unfortunately. But even if I can't stop it, that don't mean I don't have to acknowledge what's at play here. But this has been going on because we don't collectively have any real system. And after over 300 years of being betrayed and treason, and the only thing that separates a people who function as a nation versus people who function as a disjointed, oppressed population is their capacity to hold traders accountable. I mean, if we dealt with our traders the way they deal with Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, when white folks find a traitor amongst their midst, you know, we can learn something from them. We want our children to learn from you know, STEM or whatever. If we could start to hold our internal traitors accountable, and then when we start to develop some internal accountability and systems for calling out and true accountability, then we maybe can turn around and have real accountability for our external enemies.
So let me do this. Let me switch topics a little bit. I do want to make a quick comment about the way this is going. I love what you're saying. I always do. No, stop that. My question about it is like, it's the same question I asked before. How does that translate in your house? What does that look like in your conversations with your boys? Like, I was at we were at Dr. Anderson Thompson's funeral yesterday. A luminary scholar, leader, African-centered thought, and somebody, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, another scholar, came up and was talking about how his children were the best representation of his work. That the way that they were the testimony of his good deeds. And he used another scholar's example, John Henry Clark, to make the comparison that his children did not come out like you would have thought his children would have come out. And I do that. I watch like people that I respect. I also want to know what their children are doing. And there's a bunch of people who I've been disappointed about how their children turn out. Heard Runoko Rashid say similar things about he can't pass his library down to his daughter because he didn't spend as much time in the house. And I think that's what happens. And at the memorial, he said that John Henry Clark gave so much to the people that he didn't have time to give to his house. He didn't have time to cultivate his children because he was writing and traveling and all that kind of stuff. I'm really curious to know, you don't have to respond to this right now, but like, what of what you just said your sons could repeat, or if they have a reading list that you've given them that's developmentally appropriate. Like I really, you know, I want to know, and you know, there's no telling what your children will turn into, but like.
Can I speak to that now? Because Dick Gregory, Chauncey reminded me that tomorrow's the anniversary of the passing of Dick Gregory. And Dick Gregory once said, when I was a little boy, my mama came to me, and the elders in the community came to me and said, boy, as you get older, a white man's going to come to you and call you a nigger. And you bet not get mad or strike that white man, because God don't like ugly. And he said, every black child was told that when I was coming up. And he said, me and my wife got 10 Negro children, and we ain't telling them nothing. You know? So, I hate to quote Puff Daddy, but he said, I don't have to talk it because I live it.
Right.
We have a mistake that we've learned from the Judeo-Christian model, that since it takes two people to procreate, then it takes that same number of people to cultivate. Human beings are the most socially oriented and socially dependent and socially engaged primates on the face of the earth. There is no such thing as me raising my children and what I'm going to teach my children, or none of that. That's all a hustle and a trick. That's a way of commodifying childhood. Children are social primates. And throughout stages of your life, there will be different influences and different impacts and different priorities and different values that will bombard your children from all directions. Mm-hmm. So only thing I've ever done for my children is model and cultivate critical thinking. So even if my son's a bootlicking Uncle Tom handkerchief head sellout, he will be able to rationalize, explain, break down, dissect as to why he's doing what he does and doesn't do. So that's the only thing I want above grades, above achievement, but below hygiene. But above everything else is the capacity. I'm sorry, I got a 17-year-old, so you know it's at that time. But it's the capacity for thinking. The only thing I've wanted for my son is to avoid mass indoctrination and menticide. Everything else is negotiable. Everything else is capable. And yeah, I know many revolutionaries who have sellout children. I know many sellouts who have radical children, and there's something in between. But the most valuable thing we can give our children is the space to cultivate a space to cultivate their minds and an ability to bring in, to understand what is real, to have a real cognitive relationship reality, to be able to assess and engage with reality, and to be rooted in reality. So that's it. But other than that, I don't really say, well, you know, versus what they read. We have a house full of books, and we have an Xbox.
Right.
Whatever, man.
Right.
You know, because
Yes. Yep.
it's bigger than them. It's bigger than me.
Yeah.
So what I think we really fail our children, and I've seen these little indoctrinated Afrocentric soldiers, you know, I don't want that for my child. So I would rather have them, more so than telling my son what to do, at this stage, at 17, going off to college next year, I'm more so apt to say, why are you doing what you do? Instead of saying, do this, don't do that, I'm saying, what's your rationale? And my son is to the point where if he can't explain it or rationalize or dissect what he's doing, then he's like, well, yeah, you know, so that's what I'm most proud of, is his ability to be a critical and rational thinker. And everything else is, I can come or go with.
And going to that question, how it plays out in the house, is that, again, yes, it's bigger than all of us, but it gives great opportunity for conversation. Great opportunity for study. Ask me some question about Jay-Z, I'm like, let's go do some research, bro. Right?
Don't waste your time.
But it's that look. No,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like that,
yeah.
but I'm just saying, I hear you don't waste your time, but if he asks the question, it's like,
Right.
not only do you ask your kids questions, you answer their questions, right? And so, what kind of way to answer the question is like, I may say, well, that's not important, but right now you all up into it, because all y'all up into it. Let's have a conversation. So when he comes out the other side, rationalizing, doing all that, it's like, oh, this is some bullshit. Because I need for him to get at that, right? And bring back to me and assignments. Even in school, I would be like, well, you know, this is what you're into, so how do you take what that question was asked in school and turn it into what you need for you to talk about these issues? And so I think that's kind of how it played out in my class, because they come up. He was in sports. He was doing a thing. He was on the street. We don't talk about these athletes, but in his generation, those athletes were his friends, because he played with them since they were little, right? And so how do you have the conversations and then have the conversation? I remember even going way back to when The Lion King first came out. Like, I took him and his boys to see The Lion King. You know, as a parent, you're sitting there, it's like, oh my God, I'm so appalled. This is so freaking racist. And so I looked at my son crazy after, and he went, oh no, here she goes. They all had to come back to my house, and we deconstructed that movie. It's like, number one, let me apologize because I didn't know that shit was like that. But number two, let's talk about what we saw, right? And what that looks like. What does that mean? How does it impact your life? So always constantly talking, because you're curious, is what I also found playing out in my house. If I avoided situations, they got it from places and places I didn't want them to get it from. So I'm gonna have that first conversation about sex, whereas in the conversation, I remember, like I said, I was that mom coming home, and they had a conversation about oral sex in the locker room.
Let's talk about sex. Let's
Yeah,
switch.
okay.
Switch. Let's go into sex.
Okay.
So again, my boys, I got both of them here now, 4 and 7. So we're far from they're far from the sexual activity age. But I'm assuming that there's things I should be doing to
Oh,
prepare them, right?
absolutely.
There's things that need to be happening. I know the world is a different world than when I was 4 and 7. I know when I was first starting to explore sexuality, I had Victoria's Secret magazines that would come once a month, and that was all I needed. I was plenty for me. But like now, they pull their phone out and they put, you know, threesome ebony in, and
Right.
there's a whole
Absolutely.
world of it. I have another elder from Atlanta who gave me a model that I'm struggling with. It's been stuck in my head since he told me the story about how he dealt with his daughter losing her virginity, Orquesta Matrimonio in Atlanta. And what he said was he knew that his daughter was going to have sex eventually. And that he remembered when he first had sex, that it was in the back of a car, and it was dirty, and it was like sneaked, and that he wanted his daughter to experience the magic of the intimacy of what that act is supposed to be in a way that had the beauty and safety that was optimal. And so he rented his daughter a hotel room, right? And like, I don't know how you talked to the guy about like how to prepare him for it. I don't know how far you went. I don't know if you laid flowers out, but like he knew what was going to happen, and so he made it happen in the environment that was the safest. I don't know if I could do that, but the idea of that makes sense to me. I just know that, you know, all y'all boys are sexually active age. I don't know if y'all had to talk. I don't know how you deal with the pornography on the internet. I don't know if y'all have restrictions. I don't know what you do for the 8-year-old or the 4-year-olds. But there's so many changing contexts and access to information. I'm talking to the boys. I started doing the work with, my work it started with like high school boys. Then the younger I got, the more I realized 5th graders are talking about anal. I didn't even know what anal was for a very long time, but the 5th graders are talking about anal. And they just got access to information. And so I don't know what are some of the best ways, some of the ways that y'all have used, if you discovered in your house, to have these conversations, to minimize exposure, if that's a good thing, or maximize it, or whatever it is, and to also deal with the changing conversation about consent and safety, using, you know, my mistakes, our own personal upbringings, you know, the things that my father taught me and the things that I want my sons to know are deliberate conversations that I want to have, but haven't gotten there yet. I just want to know what y'all position is.
I just want to put out there, but ask that question. You talk about sex from the womb to the tomb, period. That when your little boy, and this just happened, I'm going to put my son out there, walks downstairs at age 2 and wondering why his penis is hard, you don't avoid that conversation. And so you ask a couple questions. Does it hurt? No. Tell me more about it. What does it mean? And then you hear the conversation, though, when I touched it, it felt good. Great, right? So let's have that conversation that we can't avoid. So even from the beginning, because human beings are sexual beings, period, right? You have the conversations about their bodies when they're very, very young, from the time they were taught, what's theirs, you know, is it okay to masturbate? That becomes a conversation. I remember we lost somebody in government, and she's like, you know, it's okay to talk about masturbation because kids are doing it. It's not like, are they sexual beings? But they're doing it from the time they're born. You can catch kids in their diapers, right? They are getting pleasure from that, right? So how do we have decent conversations about it? And it's interesting you tell the story because we were open about it in our household. And I was a developmental specialist, so I had some stuff, even though I had my son very young, that my son was open enough to talk to both his father and me. And I remember telling his father, don't tell him when you had sex. Be cool, here's the script. But of course he went with his script, told him all of it. So they had a very close relationship. So when my son was ready to do it, he went to his father. His father did the same thing. Well, bruh, I don't want you in the backseat of a car. Hit me up. Told him about safe sex, how to treat women. And then they actually I found out older, my son told me he's older. They made an agreement with that night I won't be home. The condom's in the right-hand drawer, you make that decision, and just text me when you're done. Right? So it was a safe space. It becomes interesting you tell that story because I remember being, you did what? Right? But he said, I wanted my son safe. I wanted to know where he is. I'm happy he came to me, that we were clear about what the safe sex was, how to treat her, what to do. He let him decorate the house and do the whole bit. So it becomes an interesting conversation, but it's got to start with our kids from the womb to the tomb. Right? And that means that we have to be comfortable with our own sexual bodies, right? With our own sexuality. How do we have those conversations when a 2-year-old will walk, all right, being okay in your house for a 2-year-old to walk up to you and say something, right? I was very happy my son was comfortable enough, like, and he want to show me, right? It's like, what's going on here? So I explained to him what was going on. And at some point, you know, was I age appropriate? Started out age appropriate, kept building on, and then when he was like, had enough, it's like, okay, mom, got it, went off on his way. And then check in with them. So, because it's just too important to our community to ignore that conversation. And first you got to check in your thoughts about it, your feelings about it, your feelings about how you were raised, what you were told, your first sexual experience. How do you explain that you're checking your child? Because I just don't really believe lying to kids, right? Even though I tried to rope his father in the new narrative, he's like, whatever, right? And he explained in a way, but he also explained, it was a young age when I had sex. This is why that wasn't appropriate. This is why I wouldn't see this for you. And just really got down and dirty about what that meant for him, how that meant for him, which I'm appreciative now. I was freaking out when I first heard it. And so, because we are sexual beings.
Well, y'all better than me, because I don't play that.
That's what
Now, when
I have a conversation.
When my children were before the age of consent, it's about anatomy and physiology. Now, I will talk and use the correct anatomical terms, but I'm getting a bit weary with the sexualization of children for profit and monetization. Again, I think much of the sexualization of children is about, number one, it's two things. Number one, it's about generating profit. You know, these little outfits they have for girls and this sexual prowess of young boys, and it's for profit, and it's also for control and, again, indoctrination. So, I mean, if you are not old enough to get on the L by yourself, you know, I don't think, I have a 11-year-old and I watch him. I observe him. I learn a lot. You know, I'm a very, you know, I probably don't come off, but I'm often, most of the time, I'm just watching and reading things in terms of human behavior. So I believe with children, when they don't really have the cognitive or even physiological
do.
ability to consent to or engage in sex, I think that we need to be scientific, anatomical, and physiological with them. You know, define to them what the penis and the testicles and the anus and the vagina and the mammary glands are. And I don't really discuss, you know, intercourse or sexuality with babies. It's not really,
Your
you
thing.
know, necessary.
Yeah,
right.
your thing.
Right.
Yeah.
In terms of their
Your thing,
development
right.
and in terms of what they have to carry. As far as when they get older, and they are with my 17-year-old, you know, it can go from understanding the anatomy and understanding physiology and the development and the hormones to engaging with it and utilizing them. Then you give, again, it's all about honesty and being straightforward and articulating with them and helping them to develop. But, you know, in terms of if he does convince a girl, you know, to do something, I mean, he's gonna have to be completely on his own. I ain't written nothing.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna put out there,
like I
puberty
said,
starts at
you know,
9.
that's
It's like,
I guess I'm radical, but I'm not
puberty starts
radical.
at 9.
Yeah.
Can't wait
So
till
that's the
17.
thing.
Yeah, that's
I'm
on
always
y'all.
thinking like,
No, I don't wait to 17, but I mean, sexuality. Well, here's the thing: sex is primal.
that's okay.
Sex is primal. Marriage is political, and relationships are essential. And so, again, with his sex, in terms of his gender identity, his anatomy, that's primal. That's something you can't escape. In terms of relationships, informal, formal, intimate, personal, that is very important. And he needs to know, how do you interact with other people? How do you value other people? How do you cultivate meaningful relationships with other people? Sex is a drive. It's a primal drive that you should cultivate. But unless you can master the essential relationships and the political nature of bonding with somebody, then that primal drive can be highly disruptive.
Wow.
So it's about, again, a holistic approach.
Wow.
It's about, again, developing the child in totality. Remember the primal, political, and essential elements that go with sexuality. And again, we are African people. We are under systematic genocidal oppression. So everything we do needs to feed into subverting the systems of oppression and elevating and contributing to the subversion and of the system and empowerment of African people. So even our children's development and their relationships, you say, when you walk into this relationship, how does this serve what I tell my sons, make a positive contribution to the just aspirations of your people, even in your personal life and your personal intimate relationships. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
That's all right. Bringing it back to the home. I remember I just had a conversation with my son. We was on the train, we was going home, and he said, "Mama, long as I'm honest, I can, you know, with women, long as I'm honest, I'm gonna tell them I want to be in a relationship, and you know, and we gonna do it. And as long as I'm honest, you know." And I looked at him. I said, "Somebody gonna hurt you." All right. So even with sex, back to what he was saying, that's nice. The candles and the lights. I remember all that, the flowers. But what I remember the most is how that made me feel afterwards when they didn't call me, or when they didn't return my text messages. And so that's what I talk to my my children about. Sex is sex. It is just that, you know, that intimate, that intimacy, that feeling, that you know. But what happens after that? I want them to always think about that. And he said, Mom, you act like women are crazy. I said, we can be, you know, especially when our feelings are hurt. I always, and so I'm real big on emotion, even in my classroom, and we talking about 3 to 5 year olds. I remember the day before Toni Morrison died, you know, and we have just went to go see her documentary. I was reading all of her books at the time. I was devastated. Before the day that she died, my soul wasn't right, and I was going back and forth with her body, and I went into my classroom, and these 3 and 5 year olds, we was sitting down and we was having morning meeting, and I usually come in and I'm happy because I'm always happy to see them. They bring so much joy to my life, and that day, and I said, I'm feeling sad today. My friend died, you know, and we started talking about her and, you know, why I was feeling sad, and they automatically related to when they friends died, and it's always about emotion with me and what comes after, you know. So that's nice. I remember a friend of mine said that he would probably, I remember my son first told me that he had sex, I went mute. Couldn't talk for a week. I was like, what? And he said it just with the ease. We was riding down the street, and he said, I said, oh yeah, just, you know, let me know when you having sex, you know, it's about that time. He was like, oh, I've been doing this since June or whatever. And I was like, and I ain't talk. I didn't, you know, I was like, really? And I swear that the first thing I thought about was that girl. I was like, man, you know, what comes after that? I remember what came after that, you know. And so, yeah, sex is...
It's a rough conversation
Sex is
for us.
hard.
Yeah, and I
even
just
with
want to
the-
add to that. We think
yeah.
about when we talk to them, puberty starts around 8 or 9. It's like, well, you know, when he gets around 14, I'm going to, because he's starting to understand it. Puberty happens way earlier. As a matter of fact, you can tell, like you see a little kid walk around, according to science, when you see a little kid walking around in glasses, puberty onsets if you're going to have eye issues, the gene. Now we're seeing this 7 or 8 year old. I remember thinking in my head, oh, because we're thinking, oh, 14, 15. It starts so early and those feelings start so early. It's not to sexualize children. It's talked about sexuality when it begins, when they ask questions. We know scientifically that those feelings are there when they're born. We know this. This is in our book. So we, again, have to deal with our own notions about what sexuality is and how do we talk to our children about it at each stage that it comes. And the stage starts at birth, right? Things start to happen at 1, at 2, at 3, at 4. And how do we be appropriate about it? So we have to start educating ourselves about it, right? Because even in all that, my son, he was 17, told us about it. And nothing I can do about it. Right? It's like, okay. But what I was glad about that we'd had conversations about relationships, about what's after, about how to treat women, all that. And so I just had to, and what becomes interesting as a mother, I knew when he walked in the door to my house, I remember laying in the bed, he walked by my bedroom going, oh my God, I think he just lost his virginity. So I got the next morning, I said, this is the mother thing going on. He's like, oh yeah, Mom, can we talk about it? And we had a whole conversation about that first time, right? And it's like, I wanted to be mute, but I couldn't be mute. I had to have a conversation because now I can't talk to you all your life about what this is for you and now not say anything, right? What does it mean? What were your feelings? What were your thoughts? What happened, right? It got even a little dicey. I'm thinking like, I said to her, TMI, TMI, TMI. But I'm glad that he had that conversation with me, right? And so
I want to
it's
add
a personal
layer.
personal thing.
So there's the biology of it,
Right.
but then the society's changing.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about it when you mentioned having sleepovers,
Right.
and the exposure now to same-sex experimentation, and how that changes how we play house, what our children are open to. If there's another layer of added restrictions or a different type of conversation we have to have now, that they can see men kissing, and that might make them think that I want to try that too. I just want to make sure that's a part of what we.
Ain't nothing changed, man. Every
Wait,
generation.
I'm thinking when I played house.
Every single generation.
I was touching
my
that too.
great grandparents
Right.
said that things were changing.
Mm-hmm.
The conditions in the environment, that we operate, the technology is advancing. But I mean, I think things, because sex has 2 major components. One is the fundamental component is procreation. The other component is pleasure. We all are very clear on the component of sex for pleasure. But we do not have the capacity because relationships are now in the marketplace. You will find articles online where the young people younger than me are talking about before they sleep with someone, they have to know their credit scores. And there are these debates about what should be your economic standing before you should engage in sex and or procreation. You know, what should I own a house? What should be my degree? And people are making these stupid statements, which is genocidal, because we don't control our own economic standing. As Shahrazad Ali said, the white man is the god of jobs. And if we put our procreation in the economic arena and we have no control over the economic arena, from printing the currency to the means of production to the distribution of resources, no control, means we put our capacity to reproduce ourselves. And because our capacity to reproduce ourselves is in the marketplace and in the capitalist arena, there are some studies that show for every viable female of reproductive age, for every 100 viable black women, there are less than a dozen viable black men who can meet those material markers in order to have a relationship. So even if our kids know everything there is to know about sex, and even if our children have the healthiest approach to sex and sexuality, even if our children value each other, because of the larger systems and institutions of oppression, they don't have the ability to healthily express themselves or to help or to properly engage with those relationships. So again, we are kind of flipping the pyramid. And the things that the larger base of the pyramid that will lead up to making for the healthy individual at top, we invert the pyramid, and then we have this individual trying to create human relationships, a human experience in a fundamentally inhumane system. So our relationships are political. So as you talk about to your children about sexuality, sex, relationships, if you don't infuse that with revolutionary analysis and a revolutionary agenda, it doesn't matter. Even if they find their Michelle Obama, and they have this wonderful relationship and beautiful black children, and then they will be ordering drone strikes on the African continent and slaughtering thousands of African people, and then going home to sleep and rest their heads in their beautiful black home. Everything. We can't escape this. Sports to sex.
Yeah.
Until we get it in our heads. All right, sorry.
Don't sweat it, man. I'm enjoying it. Just to kind of further the thought about this maybe age-appropriate time, and it might just really depend on your house. My oldest has this funny way of, he learned over the course of this development, right, of being able to self-soothe. You know, instead of always rushing into the crib to, kind of when he's crying, work that out. You know, there's some occasions where we would be there, right, but after a while, it's monotonous, dude. You got to figure that out. He worked out this way to bend his entire ear into his ear. That was his way of self-soothing. So as he was going to sleep, that's what would happen. He'd fall asleep doing this. And then at one point, not only was he doing this with this hand, but his other hand had gone into his pants. It was at that point then I needed to start having a conversation.
How old is that?
And this was, my oldest, it was about 8. 8 and 9. No, 7, 8. Okay? 10 years later, roughly, there's a 10-year gap between my oldest and my youngest. Again, don't drink the water and pump the cotton. My youngest, all throughout his days of being in the NICU, and even when we brought him home, he would sleep like this, on his back, both hands up. Moving into the age maybe 3 or 4, he goes from laying on his back, both hands up on the bed, looks so cute, right? To one, being down in his pants. And so now I've moved from having a conversation with my child at 7 or 8 to having a conversation at 3 or 4. And it was blowing my mind that it had to happen like that, but it was just and I don't know what to attribute it to. I guess going back to the initial part of the conversation was when are we having the conversations and how are we having the conversations? I'm not at the space, we are not at the space of being ready to, set up a hotel room and get the flowers, excuse me, and make the phone call, and maybe even set up a car to pick them up. And we're not at that stage, but we are at the stage of being able to equip them to be ready for and to be able to have a conversation. If I move, maybe again shifting a bit from not only being prepared on the physical side, but on the emotional side. As a brother who came up, and I'm not proud of this at all, right? But I kicked it when I was younger. And many of you know what kicked it mean. I mean, I kicked it, and I had many. And what took me aback as I became a parent, before moving into that parent, stage, is having some conversations with a few of the, my past relationships and how detrimental that time period was for them, for the women. And it made me, kind of be a bit, I had to approach this situation, I guess, differently in terms of how I wanted my children, my two boys, to kind of get into this relationship piece. I couldn't just have them duplicating what I did and just going through girl after girl after girl and not thinking about the emotional side of that. So it put me in this position of not only with mine, but all of the ones that I had access to, my nephews, godsons, things like that, and in terms of helping them to understand that once you, start to think about, getting into these spaces, I need you to understand that there's an emotional piece there that we all are responsible for. That a lot of these protective factors that we might put in place don't cover. They don't take care of. And so on the front end, what does that look like? To my oldest, my youngest is not at that stage yet, but to my oldest and to my older godsons and all that, you will not have one girl coming through the front door, another one going out the back door, and someone else coming through the window. It's not happening. You're not going to have one girl on this phone, someone else has this phone number, and someone else has that phone number. Only because I needed them to understand that you have to be more responsible in these relationships, period. Not that we want them to start marrying early and all of that, but I need you to understand that once you engage in this way, be it that it's even just, there's no sex involved, right? Understanding that the emotional part of relationships is very serious, and we have to, approach it differently. And so that's how the conversation kind of looks on our side of the table, if you will. And it's making certain that they are clear that it's not happening. If you're going to engage in a relationship, it's going to be one. And you all are going to work that relationship as best or as however you can. And when it's time for it to be over, it's time for it to be over. But it won't be over because she's finding out that you got 2 and 3 other girlfriends on the side, and everybody's emotions are being broken. Because again, when I had the conversations with others, I started literally feeling bad to where I needed to pick up the phone and start making phone calls. Listen, I apologize for the ruthlessness that I was as a short. I don't know if it's a part of what's supposed to happen, or if it's just me, trying to do things differently. I don't know.
Does anybody else not care?
Well, you know what? So,
Does anybody not care what?
No, you may not.
I said, does anybody not care about what?
but these were interactions, right?
Does-
These are just interactions.
I never got to my white girl thing. Anybody else feel like they would be betrayed if their sons brought home a white girl?
You said,
Absolutely.
I just don't want it.
but you said you'd love him no matter what.
You do love them no
I mean,
matter
I
what
would
you
have
like it.
to.
Yes.
No, you don't.
Yeah, you do.
I'm like the phone contract, terms and conditions.
No.
If you like, my
No.
son can do that with his phone, he can do that for his parents.
Well, I think that
I
goes
got
back
terms
to
and conditions.
just making that whole emotional connection back to what this brother is saying. So, right? So, with my son, you can do that. You can play the phone game. You can have one girl in, one girl out. But what my stance is to understand what is going to happen
Sure.
if you do that.
So,
And not only that, what happens to women, what happens to black women when you do that. It is devastating. It is traumatizing. And that's just one person. That's you, just one man. What happens, then it's another man, and then it's another man, and then it's another man. No matter how honest you are, no matter how sweet and how loving you are, that's tacking us down every time. And and you have to think about what he said. Not only are you doing that to women, you're doing it to black women. So what is your responsibility now for your race and how, black women are thriving and, cultivating, because that's a big part of who we are and what happens to us. So, I mean, having it around and talking about it and, why do you want to even sleep with a white woman?
And then
I had a friend to tell me, my sister is dating a white man, and he said, I'm gonna tell you why I don't want you to date a white man, because it's a strong chance that her great granddaddy probably raped your great grandmama, and sometimes that's just good enough for me to hear, and I don't want to do it no more. And so it's like what this brother was saying. It's just they just surrounded by it, and they, yeah.
Well, I'm going to go ahead on a limb because me being in my revolutionary black power from the moment I get out of the womb, about 5 years ago, my son came home with a Palestinian. And I'm just going to say that it not only broke my heart, I had to go to therapy. That's just how devastated, because this thing, well, she's Palestinian, she ain't white, I'm white, I even went and let me look up the race of Palestinians and kind of put it in his face.
PLO? Like radical or like
She's pretty radical. Okay. No, she's very, very radical, where they butt heads about how radical she was, and sometimes she thought he should, fought in the army, and one of her biggest issues is that I would get pissed and call her a white girl. She's like, I understand where your mother stands, but I'm not white. Palestinians don't white. But for me, it wasn't a black woman. And so I gave him the blues. I just, like I said, I went to therapy behind it. I had to talk to friends about it. I screamed and howled about it. My friends are like, and it's unconditional, because no matter what that boy does, even if I had to put him, I'm always his mother. That was the promise made before any of this. That will never end, and it's always unconditional. But I don't have to like everything he does. So in explaining that to him, starting out like, this is forever, baby, but you got to hear about, in public, no matter, my mother had to grab me, and his uncle had to grab him. That when he first told me about it, because I thought he thought it'd be cool, and he'd tell me about it in public. You know your mama, right? And we're at it. How dare you? I'm crying. I'm hurt. I'm devastated. And so they're not together now. And he tells me part of the reason, because I was just so dogmatic about it. So I'm like, should I feel bad? I don't feel bad at all. Bye. And not that she wasn't, and she was down. She did her thing. She made lots of money. She fought in the war. She did all of that, but it wasn't a black woman. And so it became interesting, because we had to go back and forth. It's like, part of the reason that I was in his ear, I'd pick him up and just make a crack about the Palestinian babe. Right? That was with my family. What's up with the Palestinian babe? And so between that and the other issue I had to remind him is that he slept with somebody else, somebody else, and they were all black women. Come on, bro, what's up with that? And she caught him like 3 times. It's like, will she just go away? Because clearly. So I have no problem saying that broke my heart, right? It didn't break my commitment to my son or my unconditional love, but I even went to him like, do I need to take you into therapy? It's just something I did as a black woman, because I'm all thinking in my head. And so he's explaining these new contemporary ways that basketball play all over the world. He played in Israel. And in Israel, as a matter of fact, one of the fights he got in having her when they were going to a function, because she's actually was the lead engineer of building stadiums in the, they went to the opening of Kaepernick's teams. They were walking by and somebody called her a sand nigger. And they all got into a fight. So in her land, that's who those folks are. So, but for me, it still wasn't a black woman. You couldn't explain to me enough, and so we had to constantly talk about that. And he may struggle and things, so he's always around it. He was in Israel for a long time, and so he didn't like the Israelites, but he loved the Palestinians. we're going to talk about when I went to visit the Palestinian women just being, they come to you to try to get, they kept coming to me to try to get permission to be with him. It was insane how they were all over him. And yeah, that's, and still to this day, it's like if he comes home, we're going to be at it. I even told him, I said, you know what, you end up marrying her, I'm not coming to your house for Christmas. And I don't care, call me wrong, I don't care. I'm not coming to your house for Christmas. She ain't coming to my house for Kwanzaa because it ain't for her. It ain't happening. But, so she got concerned because they were getting a little serious about what about the kids. I said, oh no, once it's your seed, it's African. Be clear on that. So the kids can come and you can come, and I made it clear with her. So wrong, right, or indifferent, at some point even doing therapy behind it, that I get to not agree, but I don't have to give up my principles and what I stand on. What about the liberation of our people? And that's why I tell them, like, dude, you handing over our wealth, you're handing over the kids, right? You can't do that. I was constantly in his ear. Call me right, because, you know, because he actually thought, because of the way we raised, like, you know, mom ain't gonna, she might trip a little bit, but, you know, she's all about human beingness, folks being together, until it came, you come home with a white girl. So I don't mind saying that out loud. I don't know if I should be on camera considering I'm a professor, because I'm sure I talk different in my classrooms, but it's just something about the position white men are insane about the black body, but white women were just as bad, and they still are, right? Still, if you take all the reasons black men are in jail, to my sons all the time, it's behind some bullshit of a white woman, right? They whisper in your ear and do some other shit in your other ear. You marry them and they take your money and give it back to their daddy, right? And so I constantly do this, and I respect all human beingness. I hear you. Be white. Be a white girl. But I'm brokenhearted if you got, because why, and even just ask her. And she said, because she ain't tell her daddy. So I said, oh, you ain't told your daddy nothing. What's that about? Oh, your daddy gonna go crazy if you come home with a black. Of course he's gonna go crazy. It may kill him. She had the nerve to say, John's getting established and he's getting up there, and once he gets established, she'll respect that. I said, you hear this shit? Do you hear this? And I'm in this, do you hear this? Oh, he came out the wrong way. So my thing is that, because Palestinians are way about their nationality, right? And actually other Palestinian people, I'd say, oh, she may go so far, but she's not going to defy her daddy. And I'm like, and you ain't going to defy your mom. And I said he won't or will. And they broke up because I am very happy they're not together anymore, right? And so I'm okay admitting that, but unconditional love forever, it don't matter, right? It don't matter.
Claps for that.
It's a tough space to navigate. I think my moment of being potentially certified to somebody's institution was when my oldest, we got the word that he had been in the classroom running his fingers through his teacher's hair.
Oh my gosh.
So you can only imagine how many conversations that had. The first one started off with the school, right? And check your employee and
How
allow
old
it.
is he? How was he?
This is second grade. Okay?
His teacher was.
She was white. Okay?
And you didn't
and-
want him to put her fingers through his
Oh, there was no need.
Right,
One,
right,
there
right.
was no need for that to be
Put
happening.
your finger in my afro.
But for her to allow it, I mean, that's another part. My certifiable moment was once I found out, and I may have taken this to the extreme. I'm certain I'll get a number of looks and maybe and ahs. But after that, thinking that, at least within again, the network that I talked about earlier is very vast in terms of, you know, sisters with the hue, my wife, my sister, my mother, other aunts and godmothers, and all of that stuff is there. And the hue expands from one side of the spectrum to the other. Lovely, right? But somewhere within those few years, there was still this level of infatuation with running your fingers through somebody else's hair, and it took me in. So from there, my response was, every time we were together, even at now 3, right, 4, not second grade, whatever.
Could he rub his? Could he rub his fingers through anybody else's hair?
He could do something through someone else's hair.
Like his, was he able to do that to his mother, to his sisters, to? He was able to do that.
Yes. But what I found myself doing, and it may have been a premature response to just an very emotional response, was every time we would be together, if it was in the car driving around, and the sister would walk past or she would pull up. Isn't that a beautiful sister right there? That's a beautiful young lady
Yeah.
right there. It didn't matter what. My psychosis took me from that one moment of hearing about him running his fingers through this white woman's hair to, dude, something you have done incorrectly
Yeah.
where it shouldn't be
It's just my
happening.
way.
What if every
And
time
so-
you saw a white girl, you would shock them?
If that's what it takes.
Yeah, that's
Shock
right,
the
right.
shit
That's
out
what it
of
takes.
And
right.
if that's what it takes, then I would be okay. But I guess in my response to it, and years have passed since, and things have changed, and he's done, and he hasn't made any commitments now. But if he were to, back to your other question, I would be in this position. And then I have all these other experiences, even when I was in school, right? Let's go back to my college days.
You said just kicking it. Was there any white girls in there?
Say that one more time.
You said you used to kick it. Was there any white
There
girls
were no
in there?
white girls in there. No, I mean, that wasn't.
Yeah, applause.
There were no white girls.
Hilarious to me.
There were no Asians. There was all sisters. Period. Which even made my come to Kwaku moment more heartfelt, right? Because once I realized all that I had been doing to the sisters is what took me into this other space of trying to, one, raise my sons and godsons and everybody else differently, and then, as you say, not really intentionally reach out, right? Because I'm married now. I'll be 21 years in November. And I'm not trying to mess none of that up for the sake of trying to go back and heal some situations. But when the conversations just come about and when we would cross paths, it was at that point where we were able to kind of, and I was, in a way and in a sense, trying to atone. But I have all of these other experiences through college that also have me in this position of not wanting to allow my children to have to go through those same experiences. And they're not good experiences of friends, male friends who have had relationships with white girls that have turned out well. One of my friends, maybe about 7 years ago, is just now getting out of the penitentiary for being in a relationship with a white that everybody knew. Everybody knew that they were in a relationship on campus. The people that did not know were her relatives.
So it always happens.
When that father and brother that was older and uncle happened to come to the campus just on GP, right? They're coming to check in on their daughter. The friend is in the room. He's handling his business. They're both handling their business. They come in. The family comes in. And she immediately hollers what?
Right.
Matters not that the entire campus knew that they were in this relationship. What ended up happening was he went to court, he got locked up. And there are a number of those conversations and stories that I'd have just from friends back in the 80s. And that's enough for me in terms of my child coming up and everybody else that I have kind of access to and can put a hand on and bump a shoulder with to stand firmly on, no, it cannot happen. And I need you to do everything possible within your power to make certain that it does not happen. If that means you need to spend more time with your mother and your aunt and your grandmother and your aunts and everybody else, if I need to tap into every other sister in this space and make sure that you can have and hear about other experiences and stories about how, then that's, I feel like I'm obligated to do, because I cannot risk having to put myself in a position to want to take somebody's life for jeopardizing my son's life to the expense of what I've experienced through other people.
And that's just
And so-
how far you have to think into this. And so that's what I was telling you from the beginning, like, it's so much work. Like, it's so much work. And that's just how far you have to think about sex. And now we're talking about that little bitty.
And I still
Tiny
think that
piece.
hard, and my son is 34. I still think
Yeah.
that hard.
Oh, yeah, me too.
I still think that hard.
Me too.
I worked in Rikers Island for 3 years in the prison infirmary, and it was in the 90s where they had just started allowing female CEOs in the men's jails and allowing men in the women's jails, the Rose and Singerson, because a lot of people don't know that Rikers Island has a huge all-women's facility right there in the midst of the all-men's facility. And one of the hardest rule and fast rules is that the guards were not allowed to engage in any sexual or intimate contact with the inmates automatic. You could beat them to death. You could turn strong water, like fire hoses, on them in their cells. You can strip them down and put them in freezing cells and still keep your job, but you couldn't have sex. And they explained it's because of the power dynamic. That you could not in any way, even if both people consented, because of the power dynamic within that micro society between the guards and the administrators and the employees. I mean, they kept saying that in the orientation. When I wasn't even a prison guard. I was a radiographer in prison infirmary. Well, it wasn't even an infirmary. It was a full-scale hospital. I mean, that place was a. But anyway, they said you can't have intimate contact with the inmate population because of the power dynamic. You will be essentially accused of rape or sexual exploitation. So as long as that power dynamic exists in the real world between whites and blacks and other races and blacks, I think the same rules apply. And because of there is no real opportunity for real human relations, because white people have consistent, without break, since 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, been engaged in a predatory, exploitative, and genocidal relationship with African people. And if you can set that aside for your heart, and I mean, you got that powerful love, go for it. But I do, again, think that we have to respond accordingly. For that individual decision, we have to have collective
Have a collective conversation.
positions, not a conversation, consequences.
You're right.
The byproduct of consequences. So I really appreciate, your stance and your, motherly love for your son. And my main thing with my son is I just don't, that's going to disrupt me because I know how their mother is. And I'm like, if you go out there and cross that street, I'm going to have to live with your mother. And it's
Right.
and I'm, y'all men ain't nothing. That ain't my life. But I cherish you.
Yeah.
I think
I blame his father.
Yeah,
You know,
see,
like, I blame his
that's my greatest fear. Just how it would disrupt me personally.
I think a big question that we all have to ask ourselves as parents, as mentors, like how much of this work are you willing to put in, or are you mentally able to put in? I remember me and Obari was having a conversation when he was saying that all week long, which is all year long, that he will have people calling him, my son, he did, he not, and he has his whole platform on Sundays where they can get free services from, and he make it fun, and they play drums, and it's honest conversations, and then nobody shows up, right? And I would say, oh, because they probably had to work, or they was too tired to get up, and so that would be my question for everybody here, like how much work are you really willing and able to put in to have these, I know personally, I have sacrificed relationships, finances. I moved my children from a 2-bedroom condo in Inglewood to a studio that probably was half the size of this stage in Hyde Park. I sent them to a school when they could have easily went to a neighborhood school around the corner, and paid a tuition that I could not afford. I made 5 times less than their tuition. At one point, their tuition was more than my yearly gross. So that means I had to go out and get 2 and 3 jobs, and also cultivating reading and literacy, and so it's that, right? You literally choose between having a man and raising your kids. You literally choose having and I hear doctors and, oh, we did everything, we gave him everything, I'm this and I'm a lawyer and I do that. How much time was you really talking to him and spending time with him? So I think that would be the question that should always be kind of like going through your head. And I tell my young parents that all the time, how much work are you putting in? I remember we had a kindergarten graduation and the kids all got to say what they wanted to be when they grew up, and we didn't practice it. I said, what do you want to be? And they would say stuff like, I want to work at Dunkin' Donuts, I want to work at, and I would have the parents to come back and say, why you didn't tell him not to say that? You know, Dunkin' Donut workers don't, you know, and I'm like, what, you know, that's probably where you taking them every day, and, so it's what kind of conversations are you having with him? And, you know, I know we talk a lot about the way white people talk to their kids or other cultures talk to their kids, and you can hear them I hear them all the time having conversations with their children, oh, the sun is setting, that's why it's orange and red, and they use all of these words and different, and they constantly teaching them, you know.
And why they keep growing up to be sociopaths.
And then I hear, conversations that we have, with our children, and I'm not talking about y'all children, I'm talking about the children that I work with, every day, and I would tell their parents, oh, everything I said today, he sung a song about it, he can really sing, and I would say, what happens when you sing at home? And he'll say, oh, my mama told me to shut up, and so that's the kind of things. But I just wanna put that out there, like, how much work are you really putting in to raise, the kind of children that you want to,
I'd ask
So
you.
we're
Yeah, any other fine, we over time too.
Well, I want to just give
Just
a
do some,
summary,
wrap up.
since it was about raising black children. If anyone values what I do with my children and my basic conclusion, basic points of what you need to impart to black sons and daughters, black children in general, number one priority, which I said, is basically their capacity for critical analysis and critical thinking, regardless of what they want to be or what they don't want to do. Number two, the valuing and technique for cultivating relationships with other African people. That is not something you can take for granted. That is something you have to deliberately do, because there are no institutions existing in this society, including the African-centered institution, that prioritize cultivating our relationships one to the other. Sexual, political, economic, cultural. That needs to be driven home to them. They need to seek out African people and cultivate viable relationships with them. Number three is developing a viable agenda. My personal agenda is revolutionary Pan-Africanism. But whatever they want to do, they're going to rely on those networks. I don't care, like, I have friends that went on to medical school. I have friends that went to prison, and they got out of prison. And what allowed each of them to endure, whether you endure prison and come out with your sanity, or you go through medical school and come out with your sanity, is the ability to cultivate those relationships. And a friend of mine used to say, there's a difference between relatives and family. And so that viable agenda, preferably revolutionary. And finally, this is the last one. Well, no, there's two more. Number one is subordinate your individual goals to the collective interest. No matter what you want to do, if you want to chase balls or cure diseases or fly people to Mars, so make sure that you can say that whatever I'm doing to sustain myself, to enrich myself, it also makes a positive contribution to our just aspirations. And if you can't define how that happens, you should not be engaged in activity. And finally, secularization. African people, we need to become secular. We need to give them back their gods. Irrationality, what I call spookism, small emotional beliefs in non-existent nothings, is a great hampering. They gave us, during our slavery and colonization, they didn't give us good food. They didn't give us adequate housing. They didn't give us any education, but they gave us religion. And whether it's the colonizers from the East, the Islamic colonizers, Christian colonizers, and now we got black folks into this Eastern spirituality and spookism, and they're even bastardizing African science and calling that some hooky, spooky, talk to the universe nonsense. Secularization. Make sure your child at least understands secularism and the truth behind spirituality and irrationality. Those are the I don't know, I've lost count. I thought it was three.
That's five.
Five. Those are my five in terms of raising black sons or black children in general.
Okay, thank you very much, Diallo. Are there any final statements, words? We wrap this up. I didn't also invite the community opportunity to speak as much as I had planned to, because y'all talk so much. I was
Sorry.
So before y'all wrap up, if there are any burning questions, comments that y'all been sitting there holding, we can take about 10 more minutes before we wrap this thing up. Yeah, come to the mic if you can.
Having to learn about the LGBTQ and what they're doing, as far as just in like a history standpoint. Do you think it'll like kind of confuse them sexually or push them to something that I don't want to say wrong, I'm trying to be like politically correct, but
Don't.
how do y'all feel about that?
It's a good question.
Let me jump out on maybe this perspective. I think that what we have experienced there should teach us as a community how far behind we are in terms of coming together and being able to pool our resources so that we can influence policy and legislation. Until we're able to do that, whatever else we want or don't want happens. So I'll start it off there. How about that?
That becomes a very difficult question, and as you talk about it as an educator, I know it's interesting as I've traveled to the motherland, this notion of what we're defining as the LGBT community, from every place I've been, in the pyramids, every spaces I've been, Kush, that this notion of same-sex being together, it's even in the pyramids. And people don't realize this, even the pyramids, it's been defined differently. So it becomes an interesting conversation in the black community. I think what becomes more important is that we have a conversation about that in our community, because so they'll look at, we're talking about literature and say, oh, some of the most homophobic people in the country are black people. And actually communities of color, specifically black people. But we know that exists in our community. And I even tell my students when they start going off about it, because they've actually talked about it in class, it's like, I want you to think about your favorite uncle or that favorite person in your family, that we didn't talk about their sexuality. So more about what impact does that have on our community, our sexuality, that's a family conversation. The notion of it being imposed, and I think I'm going to go back to what you were saying, that we have to, again, show up and be about it and talk about what we want in our communities. Because there's also a law that they have to teach about black people in schools, but they don't. That's a law in Illinois too. And so, but we'll see the LGBT community jump on that law, and we haven't jumped on the law, the fact that it is a law that has to be taught in our school. And then even the bigger picture, a law that they pay folks to do, and we got more white folks teaching those black history courses than we got our own, because we haven't stepped up to do it. So I think first we have to have a family conversation on what we think about the LGBT community, impact our community, the political impact, what does it mean, and knowing that it's always been here. It's not like all of a sudden our kids are doing this. That I walked in pyramids where this was portrayed on the walls of pyramid, because it's been defined in different ways through time, whereas, for instance, women taught women how to be good, intimate partners with their husbands, and the women not only taught them literally, they taught them physically. What touched worked, what didn't work. So you may see that portrayed somewhere. Men did the same thing. Men took men off, right? So men are teaching what pleasure is, what it means for you, where it means for you. So what does it mean in the black community? And so politically, I'm one, love who you love, barring my statement about being with the white girl, but how do we have that conversation with our children? Because it's got to start at home too, because they're going to get it in school. They're going to get it to themselves. Have that conversation at home. What does that mean? What does that mean for your family if it happens in your family, right? And it's a big question. It's a big question. I'm sorry.
why you get so saturated with this LGBTQAI plus stuff. It's because in society, they need, the society is charged. There's a lot of injustice. Even white folks is out here talking about the 99% Bernie bros. There's a grave injustice in society. And the people who control the society understand that people are going to want to feel a part and connected to a larger movement. And LGBTQAI is one of those movements where you can fight for justice but not threaten the status quo. The economic relationships in the society, the power dynamics in society, they're evolved. J. Edgar Hoover. There was one time in this country in the 70s where the highest paid, most in-demand entertainer in this country was Liberace. So LGBTQ, look, the alphabet folks have always been amongst them. But this is what you call a pendular society. So it goes from tar and feathering and denying the humanity and torturously murdering homosexuals to saying that it is a divine right and something we must all know. It's a pendular society, and it is used by the people in power. Because when they say, well, the gay rights movement is the social justice movement, then why is it sponsored by Disney? They have a gay day at one of the biggest, most pernicious corporations in the world with sweatshops all over the world. Coca-Cola has the rainbow can, and they're funding death squads in Colombia. I don't know, do they have a Black Panther Day at Disney? So if it was truly about, so we have to separate the gay rights movement and the gay rights policy from gay people. And I talk to a lot of gay people and people who identify as queer, and some of them understand this, just like the women's rights movement. And there was a time where they were demanding and mandating teaching women's rights. And what do we find at what was the agenda of women's rights? Female CEOs, a woman president to run the empire. Now we have a black woman who's the first general in history of the Marine Corps. It's the same thing. What is one of the first gay triumphs? Allowing gays to serve openly in the genocidal empire, to join the military, and repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. What was the second thing? Gay marriage, which is a class issue. Because all our gay cousins and aunties that we know, they ain't got no money to go to those destination weddings and all of that. So the gay rights movement is an integrationist movement, and we should not support any integrationist movement, even the civil rights movement, because integration takes the people who were persecuted by a system and embed them in the system and feed the system. But we should defend and recognize the humanity of all African people, because regardless, even all the anti-sodomy laws and all in Africa, find one that predates colonization. The same people that are condemning Africa for its persecution of homosexuals are the exact same people who wrote those laws. That one guy in Gambia that said he's going to cut the throats of homosexuals, and he's a Muslim, and he's got African children being molested in the madrasa and the Quran schools. We all remember Mugabe, who said that Europe is a gay culture, and he's not going to let the gays come and infiltrate Africa. At the same time, he was a practicing Roman Catholic and allowed for those Catholics to we know how the Catholic priests get down. He did nothing, and then the African activist woman who ran orphanages and said the priests are in Africa, in Zimbabwe, abusing our children, and they ran her out of the country to save her life from Mugabe. So this is a hustle that they're running for us, because, you know, again, when we talk about sex, we all like, oh, and we want to protect our children. This is a pendular thing, but it's not. They're not saying, oh, teach them about gay rights to protect the humanity of gays, because gay youth are committing suicide, they're getting killed, locked up just like the rest of us. And they hustling and grinding just like the rest of us. It is a hustle, and it's a pendular. So don't worry, if you don't like gay folks, don't worry. It'll be just like there was a time when Black history was trending, women's rights were trending, Darfur was trending, and now we're on to Dar 5, Dar 15. This is not really about justice. It's really about mass social manipulation. But if your children are into school, tell them to get the grades, get the hell out. All the stuff they teach is crap. And I'm pretty sure they're not really going to talk about the radicals, because there are a lot of gay folks, you know how gay dudes fight. We grew up, they're not going to talk about, what's his name? James Baldwin. They're going to talk about the gay guy who went into the military to go to Iraq and fight for democracy and freedom. They're going to even skew and manipulate that. So.
That's what I was saying. I was like, it might be a little funny though, like to read it. Like, what would it say? All of that, and he was gay. Like, I don't even know,
Right.
like, what,
Right.
yeah, like,
But you'll
what is-
find that the people that support the gay rights movement, they think they're really triumphant and they're super, they're oh, and I support gays. But at the same time, there's no threat and change to the status quo. It's an outlet for people to feel like they're contributing to justice when it doesn't advance justice. You go to the Pride Parade and you see rainbow painted police cars and gay cops. And gay people have been embedded in the system. Like I said, J. Edgar
Always.
Hoover was homosexual. He engaged in trans dressing and he's from Garvey, literally. He started with the OSS from undermining and framing Garvey from crime to setting up the assassination of Malcolm X.
That's why he never went after the mob for like 30
Yeah, they had pictures and
They had
and
pictures
tapes
of
of him. So J.
It's-
Edgar
it's
Hoover,
always been around.
whenever I think about, if we give gay people open access into society, so if I meet a gay dude, I'm like, are you a Pan-African revolutionary? Are you down for the Pan-African Revolution?
Right, we
Because
good.
if you get caught up in all that other stuff on that side, you just getting played like everybody else. And finally, they're finding that the gays, especially the West Coast, San Francisco, with the East, the two coasts are where the Stonewall riots and the gay riots started in San Francisco, basically gave it the cultural impetus on the East Coast, and